trade union struggles in 1972. Unfortunately for me, this year has recently become a less happy anniversary. It was 40 years since my beloved Republic of Ireland football team lost 3 games in a row, and we chose to repeat that calamity in all places in 2012. But the year of 1972 is something that those of us who took part will never forget, and something that we also need those involved in today's struggles to remember. As Wordsworth said of the French Revolution, bliss it was in that dawn to be alive, and to be young and very young. This gathering today is not a nostalgia fest, but it will look back at the struggles of that year. It's not to make heroes of the likes of me and Bob Rice, who's sitting at the back of the room there, and many others who were involved, but to analyse what happened and see what lessons there are for the situation we now find ourselves in. A situation that demands hard struggle as much as 1972. It was an extraordinary year. It was a year that began with a miners' strike, carried on in the summer with the struggle against the jailing of the Pentonville 5 dockers and the massive spontaneous strike wave that led to their release. Also during that summer we had what was then the biggest industrial dispute since the general strike, when 300,000 building workers came out and stayed out for over 3 months. And when I think about that now, I'm astonished we were on strike for 3 months. I'll talk about those disputes in order and speak about the building workers' strike, in which I was heavily involved in detail. The miners' strike began in 1972, beginning of 1972. It's hard for younger people to envisage these days that the miners, who are now so few in numbers, were the vanguard of the working class in those days. They were our shock troops, you might say. In 1971, the NUM annual conference decided to ask for a 43% pay rise, which I've been taking a breath there. The Tory government's offer was 7 to 8%. Inflation in the years from 1969 to 1972 had been, even according to official figures, nearly 30% over those 3 years. So 43% was not an exorbitant amount. The miners had fallen down the wage table to a very lowly position by then. They had not had a national strike since the general strike of 1976 to 1972. When the miners rejected the Cold War's offer in January 1972, the Cold War withdrew all wage offers for 3 months, and miners all over Britain then came out on strike. The miners picketed power stations, steelworks, coal depots, and all of the major coal users. They used the tactic of flying pickets, a tactic that we building workers would adopt in our dispute later in the year. Dockers in various parts of the country refused to unload ships carrying coal, and the NUM decided to stop the movement of all fuel supplies. A decision that led miners from several areas to come to Birmingham and picket the coke depot at Saltley Gates. On Monday the 7th of February, and I'm talking to Pete about this earlier because the little pamphlet they produced doesn't mention this. Us building workers, we were on strike over the victimisation of Pete Carter, who sadly died recently. Pete Carter was our leading shop steward really, the greatest working class officer up in Birmingham, so to speak. He was taken to court by C. Bryant and Son, building contractors. We demonstrated outside the law courts in Corporation Street in support of Pete, and one of our lads arrived in a car and he'd driven through Saltley. And he said there were all these miners out there picketing the coke depot, and they've been laid into by the police, they're fighting with the police. So as soon as we finished our demonstration in support of Pete, he went for his hearing, and we all got behind the great big red banner that the Woodgate Valley Site Committee had, with our names of the unions and our demands on it, and we got out to Saltley to support our trade union brothers. As we were coming down the road, some miners came running up the road towards us. They were looking to see who was coming, and then a young man ran up to me and said, "Who are you lot?" I said, "We're the Birmingham building workers, we're coming out to support you." He said, "Thank you very much. My name's Arthur Scargill, I'm the secretary of Yorkshire NUM." Within a few days, tens of thousands of engineering workers had down tools, and 10,000 workers marched to Saltley to support the 2,000 miners who were then gathered at the gates. Arthur Scargill described what happened. This is what he said: "Some of the lads were a bit dispirited, and then over the hill came a banner, and I've never seen in my life as many people following the banner. As far as the eye could see, it was just a mass of people marching towards Saltley. Our lads were jumping in the air with emotion. Fantastic situation. I started to chant, close the gates, and it was taken up just like a football field. We building workers, we didn't go out on that Thursday because we were preparing for an all-out strike on all of C. Bryant and Son sites, due to take place the following week. And that was to be in support of the pay claim, another sharp intake of effort, pay claim for a rise of 100%. And I'll tell you the outcome of that later. But the gates of Saltley were closed by one of the finest solidarity actions ever, an action that would be illegal now, though its legality would be irrelevant if unions had the will to take part in such action today. The miners won their strike after the government had had to declare a state of emergency and a 3-day week to conserve energy. The next big straw was that of the Pentonville Five. They've been imprisoned by the newly founded National Industrial Relations Court, known as the NERC. I think Ronnie Barker turned that into an insult in the series poet, you know. Yeah, I think you know. Their crime was what was called secondary picketing, which had been outlawed. They picketed a container base. Containers were then being used to load and unload ships and were taking away dockers' jobs by the thousands. The five were put into Pentonville prison, but within days workers were going on strike all over the country in protest. I'm sure Bob White will tell us about this in a lot more detail. There was an unofficial general strike building up, by hundreds of thousands were out. And the TUC had a meeting on the Thursday of that week, I think it was, and actually called a one-day official general strike the following Monday. The government were in a panic, and the dockers were freed by the intervention of a character called the official solicitor. An official solicitor had not been used since the 19th century. He used to go to court and enter a plea on behalf of people who were considered insane or not able to speak in their own cause. And somebody found him, some government bureaucrat found that this bloke existed, and there was still an official solicitor. So they kind of dug him up, got him down to the National Industrial Relations Court, and he entered the plea on behalf of the dockers and the court bench. Amazingly, the court, in the face of the general strike, decided they hadn't got a case to answer. And so they were free. Again, great solidarity, characterised by spontaneous action from below, was proved to be decided. The rank and file led the way, and the officials had to follow or risk losing control of their members. Had the general strike gone ahead, though, we building workers wouldn't have been able to take part in it officially, because we were in the midst of what turned out to be a 3-month strike of our own. In Birmingham, we had been campaigning against the lump, casual, paid by the day labour, and for better wages and conditions. And despite a boom in house building and construction for several years at that time, we had not benefited at all from that. Our wages were still pitiful, our working conditions were poor, and suppression of the union on sites was rife. The building unions had lost something like 30% of their members over the previous 20 years. Trying to organise a site meant risking the sack and probable blacklisting. I'll come back to blacklisting a bit later. But some did risk it, and gradually we managed to organise, in particular, all of the sites of C. Bryant and Son. They had the most of the council work in this city, it turned out, because they had a corrupt relationship with the city office, and people were sent to jail over that. We won a 50% pay rise on our 100% claim in February 1972, simply by threatening an all-out strike on all their sites. And the negotiation of that deal, when I think about it now, if you ever watched that programme Deal or No Deal, it was a bit like that. We had the Shop Stewards Committee seated around this long table, and Ken Barlow, the regional secretary, sitting at the table at the end with a phone. And the phone would ring, and Ken Barlow would pick it up and say, yes, yeah, I'll tell them that. Yeah, okay. They're offering 10 minutes an hour more. Shop Stewards would say, phone back and tell them to get stopped. So we phoned them back and politely declined their offer. And gradually, the pay rise went up and up and up. And we got it up to 50%. We thought, yeah, we can live with that. So we said, yeah, we'll take that, but don't tell them. So the phone rang eventually again, and the banker said,